pain was too much to handle. My only problem was I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It was different than when I broke my ankle in ninth grade or my wrist in college. Another glass of whiskey. Why can't I figure this out? Could it be because Scott just killed himself only a few months ago and I can't get his laugh and his smile out of my head? Another glass. Fuck, I just want to sleep. But every time I lay down, I'm in more pain than when I was sitting up. Could be the fractured shoulder that I'm still recovering from, but the pain is deeper than that. Another glass of whiskey. Maybe it's because my life is meaningless now. Maybe all those years of just trying to have a normal life have caught up to me. I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight this anymore. Hey guys, welcome back to the Forward Assist podcast. That story that I just read to you is a part of my journal that I've been keeping for a long time. And I've written down so many things that I have multiple journals now. Now, this is a journal that when I had gone to my second counselor, who was really good, she kind of inspired me to start writing and reading more. And that excerpt was from a part of my life that was what I considered to be the bottom of the hole, or the darkest part of my life. It's something that I have a very hard time talking about, but I've gotten better at it over the years. It's something that I used to keep hidden into a box to myself, locked it down deep, and I didn't share it with anybody. Thought I was strong enough to hold it in because I didn't want my family, my friends, my coworkers to know what I was going through. Now, we see this in law enforcement especially, and also people in the military, but I'm sure suicide has touched everybody at some point in their life, whether it be a close family friend, a family member, or just something you see in the news. And I'll go on to the meaning of suicide for me later on in this episode. But I was at a really dark point in my life a few years ago. It was to the point where I was drinking every day, smoking, not taking care of myself, not going to the gym, and I wasn't thinking about other people. I was just actually thinking about myself and how life had affected me so much, not just through my career, but through my family life. You know, I've said it in other podcasts, I was this ticking time bomb that at some point something was going to blow up. It's one of the scariest things that I've ever been through because I didn't know what was going to happen. And I didn't know how many people I was going to hurt in the process. PTSD or PTS, post-traumatic stress, and how it affects people in the military and law enforcement or anybody who's dealt with some sort of traumatic experience. I mean, it doesn't matter if you have this normal life and then you get in a massive car accident, you either get seriously injured or one of your people in the car or the other car ends up dying. That experience lives in you forever. It's something that we all deal with, but unfortunately, the understanding of how to cope with these feelings and these thoughts are not known to most people. And unless you go out and seek help, those feelings just manifest inside your head and they get worse. Now, this doesn't mean that, you need to go to a counselor 3 times a week and do all these things. It's sometimes you just need to write this down. Grab a notebook, grab a journal, and write down your feelings because you need to get them out. You cannot suppress these. Another thing is find somebody who you trust. Find somebody who is honest with you. The worst thing that I've heard over the years is, this will pass, Ian. This will be okay. This is normal. The truth is, it's not. Okay? We shouldn't have these feelings constantly. Now, it's okay to feel despair or feel despondent at times depending on what happened. I get that. But you need to find that person that's honest with you, that can have that conversation that says, listen, dude, you're pretty fucked up. You're not the person that you used to be. You're drinking too much. You're not taking care of yourself. And you need to get back to the person that we know you can be. Now, fortunately enough, I had a few people in my life that were like this. First of all, my wife, she dealt with so much of what I was going through, and she saw the effect of years of despair and things that manifested themselves in my life, and she was dealing with it, and she had never dealt with a person that she loved and cared for so much that was going through this. She knew that there was a problem, and she knew that I needed help, and she advocated for me to go. We had some very tough conversations about where I was at in my life and what I needed to do to make this better, because now we have 3 little kids and I need to be the example for them. I can't just be this broken person all the time. And I'll kind of get into that in a little bit, but I also had another person that I work with who, is one of my bosses, very influential person in my life and somebody that I look up to. And he knew something was wrong. He knew something was off with me for months, because typically I'm this happy-go-lucky guy that every time I go into the department, I'm trying to make people laugh. I'm trying to make the monotony of the daily grind of law enforcement a happy place, rather than just showing up and just trying to get the work done. So I love messing with people. I love playing pranks on people. And he saw that over a course of only a few months how I was in this downward spiral. And he called me out. He called me out numerous times. And, it got to the breaking point where one day I was going into a panic attack, thought I was having a heart attack, could not control my breathing. My blood pressure was all over the frickin' place. And I was at work. And he had a conversation with me, and he's like, Ian, you just need to be honest. You just need to tell me what is going on in your life. And no matter what, we'll get through this. And that's when I opened up to him. That's when I told him about all these things that were going on. My friend killing himself, my injuries, my PTSD or CTSD that was kicking in every time I'd I'd go to certain calls, and eventually he gave me the option of get help or you're done. Now, this was hard because all I've wanted to do in my career is finish my career, my 25-year career in law enforcement. And I was at the pinnacle of where I wanted to be in my career. And I was starting to lose grip on all these things. So to give you an example of where I was at, I was a patrol deputy. I was on the Marine Services unit, so I'm out on boat patrol in the summertime. I'm an instructor at the academy. I'm a firearms instructor, and I'm getting ready to be handed over the responsibility of our department's firearms training unit to head it up. I'm on our special response team. I'm, doing all these things for figuring out new equipment for logistics and trying to get our department the best equipment possible. And I'm trying to influence our bosses into purchasing and getting grants for all this new equipment that we need. Constantly stressed out and dealing with my home life and not being able to shut off my feelings and shut off all these emotions that I'm going through. And it started to affect not only my home life, but every single thing that I've worked so hard for to become in law enforcement. One of my favorite things is when I went through instructor development school. This was years ago. You go through this 2-week course to become an instructor, and it's a very intense course. It's very hard, and not everybody makes it because not everyone is, I guess you would say, fit to be an instructor in law enforcement. You need to know how to talk to people. You need to know how to explain the process, how to do something, or like in firearms, you need to be able to explain the functionality of the weapon, how to grip it, how to hold it, how to stand, how to press the trigger, how to hit your target consistently over and over again. And you're teaching people that some people have never held a weapon before. And that's a misconception to a lot of people out there who don't understand law enforcement. Is we get a lot of officers that come in that have never shot a gun before, have never even held one. And you're teaching them the very basics going through. So you need to be a good instructor. And it was something that I still am, but at the time I'm so passionate about. I think the hard part is I had a lot on my plate, and time management was a huge issue for me. It was huge. I could not, it didn't matter if I grabbed my notebook and wrote down every single thing I needed to do throughout the day. It was just too much for me to handle. I was wearing so many hats, and I wasn't delegating things to other people that I worked with, that I was trying to control everything and I couldn't. And I was constantly failing. I was constantly in my lieutenant's office or my sergeant's office or my major's office having these conversations. It always ended in, you need to get your shit together again. This is not the person that we know you are, and you need to figure this out. So we go back to that day where I'm at my lowest point, and I spill my guts to my boss. And this was very hard to do because I was at that point in my career where I'm like, okay, I'm fucking done. I'm going to tell him everything, and he's going to think that I'm this worthless piece of shit, and I can't control anything in my life, and I'm going to be done. He's going to take my gun and badge. I might as well just hand it over right now. Everything that I've worked for all these years and have tried to perfect, all that's gone. So I spill my guts to him. I tell him every single thing that's going on in my life. I tell him the amount of pain physically that I'm in, the amount of mental pain that I'm going through. And Just to give you guys some examples, this was about a year after I got injured chasing after somebody. So I had fractured my shoulder in multiple places. I had impingement in my neck, which was leading to a certain kind of paralysis near my trap behind my neck. I had something called a Bankart fracture and cubital tunnel syndrome in my left arm, which caused paralysis to my fingers on my left hand. So, and this is something that I'm still trying to correct. That I got the shoulder surgery, which was semi successful, but here I am. I'm turning 36 soon, and I need a full shoulder replacement. But they're not going to touch the shoulder for the replacement until I get into my 50s. But going into this cubital tunnel syndrome, what that does is that is a pinched nerve constantly in the back of your elbow in this channel or this tunnel which it's going through. And when that gets impinged, you lose all the feeling in your middle ring and pinky fingers. So index finger is kind of good, and thumb is pretty good. But other than that, I don't have any feeling in my left hand. So, and I get these constant like lightning bolts of the nerve trying to fire up, and that goes down my arm, and that's usually when I'm sleeping at night. So, I'd gone to these state doctors, and I'd gone to the workers' comp doctors, and they're recommending this, recommending that. And, one of the things that I was on is I'm on like 9 different medications. Okay. I was on nerve blockers, muscle relaxers, pain management pills. I was all the way out to freaking blood pressure medicine because my blood pressure was off the charts. There was times where I was like 180 over 115 constantly and could not suppress my blood pressure, and I was getting fat, and I wasn't working out, and wasn't running, wasn't biking like I normally would, and I just turned into this giant piece of shit that felt sorry for himself. And one of the conversations I had with my boss that day is he was saying, I understand that you drink a lot, Ian. And I was like, yes. And he was like, well, why? And I said, I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself, because to me, alcohol had never been an issue in my life before that, but now it was an everyday thing. And, it wasn't like I was showing up to work drunk or drinking before my shift, but the minute I was done my shift and I got home, man, I was crushing some beers or crushing some whiskey just to try to numb the pain. And there's certain medications that for pain management that I'm allergic to. And I think that's a good thing. I do have a very addictive personality, and it's something that I'm working on through years of just understanding and having a better knowledge of what I'm going through, but I'll kind of get into that later. So during this conversation, my boss asked me, well, how many medications are you on? And I said at the time, I'm on like 9 or 10. I'm on medications to sleep because my insomnia was kicking in. I was averaging about an hour and a half to 2 hours tops per night of actual sleep. And I think that was the hardest part, was here I am trying to sleep and trying to modify the way I slept because of my arm, but, and I don't know the medical term, but I would wake up in the middle of the night having dreams that my arm got cut off or blown up or whatever because I couldn't feel my left arm. So I'd wake up in the middle of the night grabbing my left arm and making sure that it was there. Because of the paralysis, I couldn't feel it. I would get into bed at 10 o'clock at night, and I'd lay there until maybe 1 and fall asleep for 20 minutes, wake up, fall asleep, 20 minutes, wake up. and that would go on through the whole night. And then I would actually calculate how much sleep that I would average in a night, and it was somewhere between an hour and 2 hours. And I was just miserable and exhausted every day, and I was angry. I was taking out my feelings on my friends and people that I worked with, and I was just being this complete asshole, and it wasn't anybody's fault but my own. So how do we change this? Well, my boss told me, I'm setting you up with a counselor, and you're going to go speak to this person. You are not going to be on the team until we figure this out, and we are going to get you help with the alcohol issue, and we're going to go from there. The hardest thing that I had to do was walk into our team room. Okay, so this is our room where all of our equipment and vehicles are, and I sat in with our SWAT team, and I had to tell all my brothers that I'm going to be off the team for a little bit until I figure this out, and I'm not operational until I get this figured out. And the majority of the guys knew something was going on. They did not know the extent of what I was going through, and I was so scared that I wouldn't be accepted anymore by these guys that I look up to so much, and that wasn't what I got from them. What I got from them was this embrace of, we're here for you, dude. Go get help. The team's not going anywhere. You call us. I don't care if it's fucking 3 a.m. You give me a call. If you're struggling and you need help, I'll come over. And that's the response that I got from everybody. This wasn't pre-planned. They had no idea what was going on. It wasn't like they were forced to say this. This was genuinely people that cared about me and wanted to see me get better. So I go to this counselor, and apprehensive. I did not want to do this. I didn't want to tell anybody other than my friends, maybe my friends at the most, what was going on. And this woman, like I stated before in my other podcast, she was like no other counselor that I'd have ever spoke to. I'd only spoke to one other counselor years ago. And the counselor I spoke to years ago was this guy that had no prior law enforcement experience, had no experience in understanding what we go through. And sometimes that's a good thing, but in this aspect, he had no background in this profession, and he acted like he knew every single thing that I was going through. And, it's not a big deal, Ian. We can get through this. That kind of stuff is normal in law enforcement, and blah, 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 blah. And he would go on. And I never felt comfortable with opening up to him. And when I talked to this new counselor, this woman, she was absolutely amazing. One of the first things she told me was, I don't know what you're going through. I don't do that job. And I don't know if I'll ever understand what you're going through. And what you've seen and what you've done is not a normal thing for the human condition. It's not normal for a person to walk into an apartment room where somebody has just shot themselves in the head with a 12 gauge, and you're seeing the pink mist, blood spatter, chunks of meat everywhere, and the smell of, that burnt smell of the gunpowder. That is not normal. That's not what normal people see. Normal people don't see, the 16-year-old that hung himself in his garage. They don't go to the call where the 4-year-old stopped breathing, and now I'm doing CPR on this little girl while her parents are freaking out, screaming and hitting me to bring her back. That's not normal. And I'm telling her these stories, and her eyes are just open. And it kind of felt good that she was listening to me instead of talking, and just, she wasn't writing anything down. She wasn't typing on her computer. Her eyes were locked in on mine, and she was understanding every word that I said. And just that power of listening is something that I've tried to get better at. And I would encourage every single one of you, if you have a friend that is going through something, you really need to understand that there's a time and place to talk. And the majority of what you need to be doing is being an active listener and just letting this person get what they need to say off their chest, instead of constantly interrupting them and trying to tell them, find a solution for it. Now, this woman told me, I'd like to see you once a week, and I'd like to have you start writing things down that are bothering you. And I want you to get a journal and then bring it into me. And if you feel comfortable, you can share these stories. So I kind of felt empowered after this first meeting, and that's crazy because I had gone into this first counseling appointment so negative. The first thing I did was call my wife and tell her, this was really good for me. I think I need to stick with this. I need to go. And the funny part was I didn't have a choice. If I didn't go to counseling, I was off the team. And then I have to worry about my job and sustaining that afterwards. So I didn't have a choice. But in my mind at the time, I was like, yeah, I think this is going to work for me. So the next appointment I had was I had to go meet with the drug and alcohol counselor. And this dude was super cool. He was just like me, all tattooed up, looked nothing like a counselor. He brings out this 12-step program, the whole nine, and he just kind of throws it on his desk, and he's like, yeah, we're going to forget that right now. We need to know where you're at. And at the time, I had stopped drinking a few days prior, but I looked like absolute shit. And if I think about it now, and the amount that I was drinking and every day of just the constant drinking, that is something that I didn't know was going to affect my body the way it did. In the withdrawals that I had, and the night sweats and the shakes and everything. And as the days went by, it got worse. The first week was horrible. Second week was even worse. And by the third week, I was starting to pull out of it. But if I would have been smart and not so motivated, I guess you could say, I would have tapered this off a lot sooner to maybe having 3 drinks a night, and then 2, and then 1, and then none. But no, I went from full right pedal all the way to the ground drinking to nothing, to slamming on the brakes. And thankfully, I'm still here today, but that was not the best decision that I had. So I stopped drinking, and I talked to this guy, this counselor, and we reviewed everything. And he came up to me and he's like, Ian, I've reviewed everything that you said, and if you're being truthful to me, if you look at the 12-step program, you're already on step 9, and this is our first day. And he goes, what is motivating you? It was the first time that I opened up to somebody and said, I am just so fucking pissed off that I allowed myself to get this bad, that I'm so motivated I don't want to even think about alcohol anymore. It was hard because I had to come out to my family. I had to come out to my parents, my brother, and let them know that, hey, this is me, and I have a problem, and I'm going to fix it, and I need you guys to support me. So, and they did. For the most part, I've had some pretty good support. I think people miss the old Ian that would get drunk and do some crazy shit. But, Again, I'm 35. I don't need to be doing that anymore. So let's talk about me as a person overcoming alcohol. First of all, I had to be honest with myself, and I had to be honest with people that I loved and care about, right? And as a police officer, and having done it for over a decade, I'd seen so many people struggle with addiction and struggle with alcoholism and drug abuse. And you'd constantly see these people over and over again. They would do drugs, overdose, you'd Narcan them, bring them back, bring them to the hospital. The next day they're out on the street doing drugs, right? The support system that these people had was non-existent. They didn't have people in their lives anymore. People had ostracized them to the point where they were no longer prevalent as a part of a person's family or friendship. And, you just feel really bad for these people. In a sense, you become numb to it after a while. It's hard not to look at these people as less than you until you become them. And what I mean by that is, how many people in these major cities do people walk by that are shooting a needle into their arm or peddling for money because they need to get their fix for the day? And we just pass by them. We don't offer assistance. We don't offer them food. We don't offer them a listening ear. And it's all because we as a society have become numb to these people that have had these addictions. They've become a sort of burden to us in society. And that's such a privileged way to look at things, right? Nobody is dealing with this situation head on in our country and in our communities. And it's really sad until you become one of these people. Until you become dependent on something to get through your day-to-day, to deal with the mental, emotional, and physical pain that you've gone in. Now, I've seen people who were college graduate, doctorates, that injured themselves and got hooked on opiates or some sort of pain medication. And instead of taking the prescribed amount, now they're overdosing it, or they're mixing it with alcohol or another various part of some sort of drug. And then that drug no longer becomes beneficial to them, so they take it one step higher, and then they take it one step higher. Next thing you know, they're shooting up heroin on the side of the street, and they have no money, and the Mercedes is gone, the house is gone, the wife and kids is gone, and here they are stuck in the darkness with nobody to help them, right? It can happen to anybody. So don't just think that these are people from the poverty level in our society, because it's not. It really isn't. It's everybody. And if you take the time to listen to these people's story and understand them, you will know that these people, a lot of them have come from good upbringings, good families that are still together to this day, that wanted these people to succeed in their lives, but then they failed. And nobody held them accountable. That's another big thing. Nobody held them to a standard to tell them that this is not acceptable behavior and you're going to change your ways and you are going to become the person that either you were or the person that we know you can be. And that's the search that I hadn't found yet. So let's talk about this. I got to this point where I quit drinking. Yeah, and it was dangerous because I was hard-headed and motivated and I wanted to fucking get after it and just quit. And it's very dangerous. But I did it. I made it through it. And I'll share my routine of how I made it through it in a minute, but I still get asked the questions by some friends and some family members as to, will you ever drink again? What do you think? Do you think you could handle it? And my response to that is, I don't know. But I can tell them one thing. I'm not going to drink today. And it's not like that all the time. It's not like that every day. There's days that go by, weeks that go by that I don't even think about drinking. In fact, this whole summer, the only time that I would think about drinking is when I was outside doing some yard work, mowing the lawn, putting in some new plants and bushes, sweating my ass off, and all I wanted was that nice cold beer. That's all I wanted. I didn't care about getting drunk. I didn't care about going out to the club and all that stupid shit. All I wanted was that nice cold beer. And I missed that part of it. But I know in my heart that I don't trust myself yet. And I don't trust myself because I haven't crossed that line yet where I've wanted to have a drink and then take that step to do it. Right? So, again, that's just a really simple question for myself to people is, will you ever drink again? And, there's a video online of a guy saying just that. And it was a message from his father when his father was a recovering alcoholic. And, he had asked his dad the same question. And the dad said, I don't know, but not today. I'm going to make it one more day. And so that's kind of been my philosophy with it. And as of a few days ago, it's been 19 months without a drink. And the day came and passed and I didn't even think about it. And then I realized it's the 16th. And and I had to do the math in my head. Carry the two. Yep, it's been 19 months. Holy shit. And for the first time in a long time, I took that step back and I said, I'm proud of you, dude. Like, you've accomplished something in your lifetime that you set your mind to, and you didn't quit, and you didn't give up, and you didn't give in to temptation, and you completed whatever journey that this is on, whatever journey that you're trying to accomplish, you're still on that path. Now, how did I get to that point? Well, I had a lot of influence. Like I said, my counselor was pushing me to better myself. So she had recommended reading. And I fucking hated reading. We'd get a new policy. We'd get a new law that would come down. We'd get a freaking newspaper in the mail. And I hated reading. I refused to. I'd skim through it, get the gist of it, and put it away and never think of it again. So I started looking up books that you need to read. It was worth a Google. I started picking up books that were recommended from different various figures, such as, your Jordan Petersons, your Joe Rogans, people of this sort. One of the books that I read that was actually recommended by a 23-year Green Beret veteran, his name is Tu Lam. And if you haven't looked him up at Ronin Tactics, do so. This guy is a living legend in my mind. He was born in war in Vietnam. His mother escaped and took him with her, and they fled the country while it was at war. And he talks about his struggles and, his whole career in the military and how he achieved so much as a Green Beret. The philosophy that he studies is Bushido. And he talks about an old samurai who is legendary in his teachings, and his name was Miyamoto Musashi. Now, Musashi was this Ronin, and what Ronin stands for is masterless samurai. So during the period of the civil wars in Japan, Musashi traveled the country as a Ronin. So he didn't belong to any master, and he became this master swordsman and warrior and fought in various different conflicts. And then he fought over 60, I believe, one-on-one matches to the death against other warriors and other samurai. On his last days on this earth, Musashi wrote a book called The Book of Five Rings. And if you get a chance to read this book, it outlines the path in which a person can take to be as close to perfection in their life as they can be, how to balance their life, and he speaks about great warriors and samurai, and he speaks that they weren't just great swordsmen or great archers. These people were masters at art, masters at food, and master at gardening. They were a master at everything that they did in life. To read this book really influenced me. So I started to listen to what Tu had to say. And there was an old Chinese proverb that, like a quote that he had read one time in his teachings. Tu was talking about his career and his struggles with addiction because, like a lot of our veterans, he was struggling with different pain medicine and abusing them for all the pain that he had been in. And one of the quotes that he states in this old Chinese proverb was, "A journey of 1,000 miles began with a single step." And as simple as that quote is, it has so much meaning to it, right? Because here I was with this journey, and my journey was, I'm going to stop drinking. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And the goal that I had superseded the reality of the situation. And it's good to have big goals in life. I think it's great. But just like anything else, you cannot take on the world all at once, right? So I needed to take this single step. So a single step for me was, let's go 10 minutes without thinking about a drink. And let's go an hour without thinking about how shitty of a person I am. And let's go an hour further with trying to just get some sleep tonight, okay? And that motivated myself to, well, why don't we wake up early? And why don't we just get to work a little bit earlier instead of waking up, I got to be to work at 6:45. I'd wake up at, 6 o'clock and take a shower quick, maybe have a cup of coffee and run to work. And I'd usually be pushing the boundaries of being late. So I told myself, let's get to work a little bit earlier. All right, be the example, especially for these younger deputies. Let's be the example for them and stop being a problem. So that gets me into my daily routine. So this is a daily routine that I built for myself. Now, the funny thing is when we go through the academy, the instructors often tell cops that having a routine is dangerous because then the bad guys know your routine. Well, yeah, no shit. That's, if you go to Taco Bell every day at noon, then fucking bad guy's going to be there at noon to take you out at Taco Bell. Now, I'm talking about a healthy routine in the morning. So this is my routine. Every morning, my alarm goes off at 4 o'clock. Very first thing I do is go downstairs And instead of grabbing the CT Crunch, Cinnamon Toast Crunch for those of you who don't know, or grabbing a huge cup of coffee and dumping a bunch of sugar and a bunch of creamer in it, the very first thing I do is grab a huge glass of water. And then I go to the Keurig and I make a pot of coffee. And, you know, I make this huge pot of coffee, and spoiler alert, it's fucking Black Rifle coffee. The best shit on the planet. So, as this pot of coffee is brewing, I drink my glass of water. And then I take that very first cup of coffee and I pour myself a cup, and I don't put shit in it. I just drink it black and I go sit down. Now, the very first thing that I do is I grab a book that I'm currently reading and I read a chapter in it. Right now I'm reading 3 books. That's my ADHD kicking in, sorry. So 3 books. I'm reading 1984 by George Orwell. I'm reading Jordan Peterson's second book, 12 More Rules for Life. And I'm reading a book called Plandemic. Now, that one's kind of like a tinfoil hat look at the pandemic. Which I haven't finished it yet, so no spoilers. But the books that I'm reading right now, I read 1 chapter in it a morning. Have to read that 1 chapter. But again, it's 4 a.m., so I can read a chapter, usually typically in about 20 minutes, right? So, after that chapter, I write down a thought. I grab my journal, whatever I was thinking about the night before or that morning, or maybe something that's been bothering me, or it doesn't even have to be that. Sometimes it's just a quote that I came up with. I write that down. And then one thing that I took from 2 is I meditate. Now, all right, let's take it through. So 20 minutes to read, about 10 minutes to write. How long do you think that I spend on meditation? I'll give you the overall gist of it. Less than 5 minutes. Less than 5 minutes, I am fully meditated. Now, I am not a master of meditation, and it is funny. It's funnier than hell to look at me meditate. I'm not a very flexible person, and for me to sit on the floor in the position of meditation, the standard one that everybody knows with your legs crisscross applesauce, sitting on the ground, is not a very comfortable position for me. So, but people say 5 minutes, that's it? Well, it takes me 4 minutes to get comfortable and maybe 1 minute of meditation. Now, I want you to try this at home. If you can meditate, and what I mean by meditation is you've completely cleared your mind. Completely. You're not thinking about letting the dog out or what you're going to have for lunch or if your boss is going to be pissed because you forgot to shave that day. You're not thinking any of that stuff. You have 0 thoughts in your mind. All I can do for myself at this point is 1 minute. That's it. So, 20 minutes, half hour, so 31 minutes, 35 minutes, we'll call it. I'm half my routine down. So then I have my second cup of coffee on my way to the gym. And then I absolutely crush my body for sometimes a half hour, sometimes 45 minutes. But I'm not one of those gym bros that sits at Planet Fitness and texts on his phone and scrolls through Instagram and checking his Facebook. I will be lucky if I take water breaks because I go in there like a fucking madman and I crush whatever I'm doing that day. If I'm doing chest, I'll do like fucking 20 chest workouts as hard and put in the work as fast as I can. And then what I do is I take a shower, get dressed, and I go to work. Now, That's a simple routine, but I do it every day. And some days are better than others. And some days, yeah, not feeling the greatest, the shoulder's fucked up, back hurts, neck hurts, making all these excuses, and I still go and do it. And the reason why I do it is because motivation for me, I watched a Jocko video on this, and he describes it in the perfect way of what I was thinking is motivation as a necessity is not an option, right? Like, it is not an option for you to go to the gym. It's not an option for me to read that chapter. It's not an option for me to write a thought in my journal. It's not an option to skip out on meditation because I'm disciplined now. So, if I do have a day where I skip out on one of those things, I'm pissed off the rest of the fucking day. And it eats at me to the point where the next day, if I missed the gym the day before, guess what? I'm going to crush it even harder at the gym the next day because I'm pissed off that I didn't complete what is expected of myself, right? And that's just me, guys. That doesn't have to be you, but I'm motivated by necessity of it not being an option. Now, how has this changed my life? Well, for example, when I was drinking, my son in particular likes to wake up early. My oldest daughter could sleep 3 days if you let her. But my son likes to wake up early. So when I was drinking, my son would be up at 5:30, 6 o'clock, ready to go. And he would be downstairs by himself. He'd throw on some cartoons, grab a glass of water, and just chill and wait until Dad woke up. And when Dad woke up, I was, 6:30, maybe, all hungover, feeling like shit, feeling like a bag of ass, no motivation, no desire to want to do anything. And think about what that does to your children and how they see you. And I'm a firm believer on leadership should be shown by example and not demanded. So if I'm telling my son to wake up, be productive throughout the day, if I'm not showing him that, then what does that make me look like? Well, it makes me look like a piece of shit. And I really was. I was a piece of shit father. And it took me a long time to realize that. So I go through this routine. And when you look at this routine that I have and how I've changed my ways, there is no hungover dad anymore. There is no waking up late. Dad is up at 4 o'clock in the morning, getting after it. And Dad is getting after it to the point where when my son wakes up, not only have I already gotten after it, but now I'm fired up for the day. And he's the one who's lazy walking around the house, telling Dad to calm down because Dad wants to go for a run or go for a walk or go play lacrosse or go shoot, street hockey pucks outside or something. And, at almost 36 years old, my 9-year-old son has a hard time calming me down sometimes in the morning. And I feel like a kid again. And yeah, my body hurts. And I'm still dealing with a ton of stress. But having that daily routine and the fact that I'm not drinking anymore and the fact that I'm doing so much to better myself, not only does it set the example for him in what I would like him to achieve someday as far as being a strong, capable person, it also brings me back to enjoying fatherhood like I haven't in a long time. And I look at the times where I took being a father for granted, right? Those times where your kid is begging you to go out and play catch or draw something with them or create something with them or go build something in the wood shop or do something, and you're being lazy and you're not picking up on these cues that these children just need you and they want you in their life, man, look at yourself in the fucking mirror, right? This kid is dying out for your affection and your love and your support, and they want to learn from you. Children want to learn from their mothers and their fathers. And I'm a firm believer in, again, leading by example, but also parenting by example. They are taking mental notes. And what I mean by that is, look at yourself in your childhood, right? Like, I grew up in a family where predominantly my mother had raised my brother and I because my dad was working so much. And that wasn't to say that my mom didn't work. My mom, for Christ's sakes, she worked like 2 jobs when I was growing up. But dad was working for the power company, and there'd be times where he was gone for 2 to 3 days, sometimes 2 to 3 weeks. When we had the huge ice storm back in 1998, my dad was gone for months. And my mom was stuck raising 2 boys by herself. And I give both of them a lot of credit because it wasn't easy. My brother and I were fucking hellions. Your typical boys back in the late 80s, early 90s. We lit shit on fire that wasn't supposed to be on fire. We broke things around the house. We broke stuff that my parents still don't know about. And we had to fix it before they got home. Like, that was the type of kids that my brother and I were. But I always missed having my father there and having these times that I really wanted to spend with him. Some of my fondest memories of my dad are us going out to our property, and we own a little under 100 acres of land, and just going out and splitting wood with him, or going out and building a tree stand for hunting season with him was a huge opportunity for me to learn, and I craved that attention as a kid. So I look at that now with my son, because he's just this fired up maniac like I was, and he needs positive direction in his life. So how was I going to do that as this drunk piece of shit all the time? It just wasn't going to work. And that emulates onto him as to, well, if dad doesn't give a shit, then I'm not going to give a shit. And it's true. It really is. And one of the major problems in our society these days are parents are just not motivated enough to teach their kids the right way of doing things, and kids are not held accountable to their actions. And being a school resource officer this year, that's shown more than anything. If the parents are not influential in their children's lives, these children are going to fail, period. Right? You may get that off chance that the kid is motivated by the failures of their parents. But at the same time, the majority of them, if their dad or mom is a piece of shit and doesn't care about them, then these kids aren't going to care about anybody. They're not going to care about anything in the world. So I needed to do that, for my son and for my daughters, is just to be a better person. I want to tell you a story about a really good friend of mine that just recently passed away. Now, this friend of mine was my brother's best friend. His mother committed suicide when he was a young kid, and he had a hard life, and his upbringing wasn't the easiest. And it got to the point where this guy was an excellent hockey player, and my brother and I grew up playing hockey. My brother was a phenomenal goalie. I was a semi-decent defenseman. This guy was, if he would have stuck with hockey and actually given a shit about school, there was no reason why he wouldn't have played D1 college or even semi-pro. He was that naturally gifted at the sport. And it got to the point where he didn't have family support. He didn't have people that really backed him and that were there for him. And he lived with us for a while when we were in high school. And again, my brother and him were inseparable, best friends. But Matt was a drinker, and Matt loved to drink and loved to party. And he was that type of guy that if we were having a party at somebody's camp or at somebody's house, Matt was the type of guy that turned that 10 meter on the scale all the way up to 12. He was just a fucking maniac, loved to drink, loved having fun, and he was the life of the party. That party never shut off for him. Drinking for Matt became a daily thing, and it became a routine for him, an unhealthy routine. Yeah, I talked to my brother over the years, and I'd see Matt every once in a while, and as the years would pass, the more distant he would become from us. And the more distant he'd become from my brother. And, I'm going to have my brother on the podcast soon, and I'll let him tell the story because I don't do it justice. But about a month ago, I saw Matt at a store, and I didn't even recognize him. His ankles were swollen to the point where they were about the size of his calves. His legs were purple. His skin was dark brown, yellow, jaundice. His eyes were the same color, this dark yellow, bloodshot, big beard, and he was overweight, and he just looked like death. And after, we visited for a little while, talked a little bit, I called my brother right away, and I was like, Matt looks like absolute shit. And my brother's like, yeah, dude, I don't know. We've tried so many years to get him help and get him support and reach out to him and be there for him, and I think it's too far gone for him. And I never thought that would be a thing. But if you could have saw him the way that I saw him, you would know. And fortunately, in this career, I've stared death in the face too many times. And I told my brother, he doesn't have that much longer to live, D. My brother apprehensively was saying, no, dude, like, he's got more time, like, he's good, like, let me talk to him. A week after I had seen Matt in the store, he was rushed to the hospital with kidney failure, liver failure, or pancreas failure. And about 4 to 5 days after he went into the hospital, Matt was dead. And it really bothers me. And it still bothers me to this day that we couldn't help him and we couldn't convince him to change his ways. And that's really hard for me to talk about, but I needed to get it out there. And that's what this podcast is designed for, is for us to talk about shit and not bury it deep like I have been. But like I said before, we're going to get into my thoughts on suicide. All right. So, unfortunately, in my career, I've dealt with many suicides. I've gone through numerous suicidal deaths, investigations, and had to embrace these families and cope with them and help them in their time of need. And we're not trained for that. We are not mental health professionals by any means, but we're people and we care about people even though we may have never met them, right? And I was going down this path. I was allowing the darkness to set in so much that I think if it would have gone any further, that would have been the next thought in my mind. And the way that I describe suicide is, I describe suicide as, if you've ever been to a calm pond or you've seen like a large puddle and it's calm, the water's clear like glass, and then somebody takes a giant rock and just drops it right in the middle of that pond. You see this giant splash. Now that is the suicide, right? That is the person committing the act. Now, the people, the water that is close to the rock that is making that giant splash are the immediate family members and the loved ones and the people that care about that rock, that person. That's the effect that it has on those people. But then if you notice, there's this ripple in the water. that travels, and as it travels, it gets smaller until it reaches the outer brim. That ripple, quite literally, is the ripple effect of what suicide does to people. So the immediate family gets hurt the most, and then the friends get hurt, but not as much as the family. And then people that knew of that person or have seen them in the past or knew that they were a part of their community, it hurts them, but not as much as the other family and friends, right? And this goes on, all the way to the point of somebody just seeing it in the newspaper or reading an article online, reads about it, and it affects them. That ripple travels so far. I mean, if you think about it, look at Robin Williams when he committed suicide. That affected so many people that had never even met Robin Williams, had never even had a conversation with him. And that's just because that act in and of itself is such a powerful act. I hear a lot of people say, well, it's a selfless act, and it's a coward's way out. And, the Bible looks at suicide as a sin and all these things. And the only way that I look at it is there's been a few people, and I think Andy Stump from the Cleared Hot podcast talks about it like this, is what that person was feeling at the time that they decided to take their life is the feeling and the pain that they transfer to every person that they love. When I heard that being described that way, there's no better explanation. So, have I considered suicide? Have I let it enter my mind? Gone down these dark paths? Yeah, I think at all points people may not even consider it, but it's a thought that runs through their mind. But I've thought to myself about this and the fact that it's not the coward way out, but it's the way to transfer all the pain and all the anger and all the resentment and the struggles in my life. That's how I would transfer it to my wife and my 3 awesome kids and my parents and my brother and all my friends and family. And I can't do that. I could not bear to transfer the amount of pain that I have and that I had over to them. So that's why I never went down that path. So this is going to be the last story I tell. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Friday, and it was a typical SRT training day. And on this day, SRT was conducting our annual water competency testing, which means we were going to a local high school pool to do some different evolutions in a controlled environment, and then we were going to go out to our major lake in the area and finish out the day with boat ops. And I got this text from my ex-wife, and she asked me if I knew which officer had been shot the night before at an agency that I had previously worked for. I immediately went into panic mode. I started making the phone calls, started sending the text messages, and there was no answer. And all I could think is something just happened that I had no control over. And why wasn't I there? And I waited And then I waited some more. And finally, I got a phone call from one of my fellow officers. And she called me, crying. And I knew it wasn't good. And I asked her, what happened? And she said, Ian, it's Scott. And I said, what's wrong with Scott? What happened? And she said, Scott's gone. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't know what to do. I asked her what happened. And she told me as plain as she could that Scott was at his house and he shot himself in his driveway. Now, Scott, for me, was the flame that lit the candle. He was my original FTO. So for those of you who don't know what that is, he was my field training officer when I first started. And this was 12 years ago. And Scott was the type of guy that was former Army, no nonsense, no bullshit type of guy. And he did things by the book, period. And it didn't matter how shitty your tour was or how bad you fucked up during the day shift or night shift. Scott was the first one to invite you out to the bar at the end of the day to have a beer. And he was a wild motherfucker. He was the first man that I ever saw that didn't take shit from anybody. And I mean nobody. I would see guys out on the street, you know, we'd be at a bar fight or domestic dispute, and they'd be twice Scott's size. And Scott just looked through that person. You know, most people would be intimidated, and Scott stared through these people with this kind of menacing look, like, and I hate to be cliche about it, but he was that blue line. He was that person that stood in the line against evil, and he didn't give a fuck who you were, how many years you did in prison, or how badass you thought you were. If you fucked up, you were readers, and he was gonna fucking take you down. And he showed no fear. I've never seen fear in that man's face. And that was something to inspire to be, because growing up, I was never one to really get into a whole lot of conflict. You know, I had played some sports and hockey and different things like that, and there were some scrums here and there in school, but I had never faced people like this. And to watch a leader like Scott was set the example and set the tone as to, we're not going to let criminals take advantage of what we are trying to do out here and trying to clean up these streets in our city. And he was that lion. Now, I said he was a wild motherfucker. I'm going to segue a little bit into how I'd like to remember Scott. Scott was the type of guy that gave me anxiety attacks for the first time in my life. I remember one time, it was a midnight shift. I'm on field training. I think I was in like phase 2, so I was in like my second or third month, and it's late. It's probably 2 or 3 in the morning. The city's dead. There's not one fucking car out there. And I'm driving, and I'm in our old Crown Vic, and I'm tooling around trying to learn the streets and trying to familiarize myself with the city. And I'm on this back street that nobody ever really goes down, and I blow this stop sign. Didn't even see it. Next thing I hear out of Scott's voice is, "Stop!" And he's screaming at me. So I locked the brakes up. And here I am thinking, we got somebody running from us. We got somebody burglarizing a house or a business or committing a crime. And I'm looking all around trying to figure out what the hell just happened. It's 3 in the morning. There's not a thing going on out here. And he's screaming at me to stop. So I lock the brakes up, throw the car in park, and I'm getting ready to get out. And he's like, "Where are you going, motherfucker?" So I look at him, didn't say a word. And he said, "I asked you where you're going." And I told him, I said, "Scott, I don't know what we have." And in his deep, heinous voice, he yells out, "Get out your fucking license." So I'm scrambling to get my wallet out, and I hand him my license. And at that time, we had these old handwritten tickets. We didn't have computers in our cars. And he starts whipping out his ticket book and starts writing my name on this ticket. And now my mind is shifted to what the fuck is going on. And I asked him, I said, "Scott, are you writing me a ticket?" And he goes, "Yeah, don't you see that fucking stop sign you just blew past back there?" And he's going off. And I'm looking in the rearview mirror. And I'm like, "No, I don't see it." So, long story short, he proceeds to get me out of the car and make me walk back to the intersection and show him the stop sign that I had just blown. Again, at like 3 in the morning. And we walk back to the car. He starts filling out the rest of the ticket. And next thing you know, he takes the ticket out of his ticket book, rips it up into a million pieces, and chucks it in my face. And he goes, "I'm not going to give you a fucking ticket, you retard. Get your ass back to the station. You're not driving the rest of the night." And that was Scott, man. Scott was fucking nuts. I mean, we would chase people in foot pursuits, and you wouldn't want Scott and I to catch you in a foot pursuit. Scott was fast. I'll give him that. But, you know, I had just got out of the academy, and I'm fat now, and I'm nowhere near the cheetah like I used to be, but I would catch a lot of people in foot pursuits. And, man, I remember the first time we ever got one, I'm handcuffing the guy, and I don't know where the hell Scott is. I know he's near me, but I can't figure out where the hell he is. And Scott's back there untying this guy's shoes. And I'm like, "What are you doing, Scott?" And Scotty fucking takes this dude's shoes and throws them up on the roof of this house. And he goes, "That'll teach that motherfucker to run from us again." I mean, he was just this old school cop, man. Just a riot to be around. And once you got to know him and you broke that hard exterior that he had, man, he was the life of the party. He was that light in the room that could always crack that really dark, sick joke that everybody relied on him for. My wife and I at the time were living in a different village, and my drive was about 45 minutes one way every day. So she had talked me into transferring to a different department, away from Scott and the rest of the people that I loved and cared about. And I think back to those times, and I don't have any regrets in my life, but I think back to if I could have stayed there, and I could have been with Scott at the time, could there have been something that I could have said to him, could have done with him, could have changed his mindset so that he didn't do what he ultimately did. And it's tough because, I would go months and sometimes years without talking to him and talking to my other coworkers there. And every once in a while I'd pop in, or, I'd get a text message from one of those guys, or I'd send him a funny video, but I got distant. And that distance really affected me after Scott committed suicide. That distance really made me feel guilty about things in the past and my whole situation with leaving there and looking to bigger and brighter things. And I did have a lot of regret at that time, and it was hard. It was really hard. I never dealt with suicide at that level before, where it hit so close to home. And that started me down that negative path that, I guess in a way I was already on that path. This just gave me that push forward. To kind of wrap this thing up, this was a very difficult podcast for me to share and for me to talk about, but this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time, and this is the reason why I started this podcast, was to get our story out and to let people know in our community that we're just people. Cops, they have a uniform and a gun, and they have a job to do, but that's the only difference. We're not better than the public. We're not this elite fighting force, and we were chosen to do this job by our own drive and our own initiative. And it's a very difficult job, and it's hard not to take this job home. But it's a very rewarding career, and it's taken me a long time to look at myself in the mirror and be proud of the person that I see staring back at me. And take what I've said with a grain of salt. I'm still new to this whole podcast thing, and I'm still new to telling this story and getting it out there. But if you guys are struggling or know someone who is, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't wake up one morning and find out that one of your best friends is now gone, and hope and pray that you would have done something differently in your life to influence them to not make that choice. When I talked about routine, I'm talking about we have this one life to live, so why not live it? And why not live it to the fullest and run that gas tank empty? That's my goal. I want to either die in a blaze of gunfire, or I want to die at an old age, but either way, I want this body and this mind and all that's about me to be as well-rounded and as used as possible. I don't want to leave anything left. And I want to enjoy my family and my kids. I want to enjoy my friends. And I want to enjoy people that I've never met before and just having conversations with them, because that's what life's all about. So where am I at this point in my life? Well, I am 19 months sober. I'm about 25 pounds down from when I was drinking. I am healthier. I feel better. I'm more capable. I'm more dangerous in a good way. My relationship with my kids is the best it's ever been. My relationship with my wife is better than I could have ever imagined. My relationships with my family and friends is strong. And I can actually look at myself in the mirror and be proud at the person that's looking back at me. And I have a better understanding about life itself. I have an understanding of the difference between big moments in life and the small moments in life, and what's more important now. Big moments in your life, for example, are, your daughter getting married, or your son graduating college, or your wife giving birth to your first child, or your parents finally getting the opportunity to retire. Those are all big moments, and those are all moments that happen once in a lifetime for most things. But it's these small moments that add up. It's how your children greet you at the door when you come home from work. It's how your wife kisses you in the morning and appreciates the fact that you made her coffee. It's that stranger that thanks you when you open up the door for them at a store, and that true affection that you get from people that you care about. Those are the small victories that add up into being a major part of your life. So, yeah, it's changed me. It's changed me for the better. And I'm excited to see what this path brings for me, and the success that I know I'm going to have now that I'm on this path. Guys, this was a extremely hard yet rewarding podcast for me to record and get out to you. It's a topic that I take very seriously, and something that was really hard for me to talk about. And like I said in the beginning, I suppressed these feelings so much that I had never talked to anyone about them before, not even people that I truly loved and cared about. But here I am on this podcast, letting it out for everybody. So if you like this podcast, like and subscribe. Like I said, you guys can find me on Instagram at Forward Assist Solutions. The podcast itself is on Apple, the Forward Assist Podcast, and that's also on my YouTube channel, Forward Assist Solutions. And if you guys have any questions or feedback, or you want to tell your story, let me know. Hit me up on my email at forwardassistsolutions@gmail.com. And like I always say, stay vigilant, be safe, and have a good night, guys.